Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be exploring Juan de Mairena by Antonio Machado. Now, this isn't your typical novel. It's more like a collection of lectures, essays, and those thought-provoking little snippets called aphorisms, all delivered by Machado's alter ego, Juan de Mairena. This book was published right before the Spanish Civil War, a really tumultuous time in Spain's history. Despite that backdrop, it delves into these timeless questions about learning art and navigating a world that seems to be in constant flux.
What I find really intriguing about Juan de Mairena is how Machado uses this character, this fictional persona, to explore these big ideas with a sense of irony and even playfulness. It's like he's giving himself the freedom to challenge conventions and push boundaries through de Mairena.
Like a mask, right? A way to say things he might not say directly.
Exactly. And one of the things de Mairena champions right from the start is skepticism, but not the cynical kind. He's talking about the kind of doubt that leads to deeper understanding.
It's like, don't just accept things at face value. Question them. Dig deeper.
That's it. And this emphasis on questioning everything actually has deep roots in philosophy. Think of someone like Descartes, the I think therefore I am guy. He basically built his entire philosophy on the idea of doubting everything as a starting point.
So de Mairena is in good company. And he doesn't just keep the skepticism in the abstract. He applies it to real-world issues like education. I mean, he really takes those rigid, memorization-heavy schools to task.
He really does. What de Mairena advocates for instead is a more Socratic approach to learning. You know, that back and forth dialogue,
Yeah.
asking questions, really grappling with ideas instead of just memorizing facts.
It's interesting because even today we talk about the Socratic method, but what does that actually look like?
Well, imagine a classroom where the teacher isn't just lecturing. Instead, they're posing questions, prompting students to think critically and come to their own conclusions through discussion and debate.
So it's more about sparking curiosity and critical thinking than just filling students' heads with information.
Absolutely. And I think that's where de Mairena critique of traditional education remains so relevant. Even today, there's so much emphasis on standardized testing and rote memorization. De Mairena is pushing us to consider if those are really the best ways to cultivate learning and critical thinking.
It makes you wonder how different things might be if we truly embrace that Socratic ideal, right?
It does. And de Mairena doesn't stop with education. He also has some fascinating things to say about art, particularly poetry. He doesn't see it as just a form of entertainment or self-expression.
For him, it's more like a pathway to truth.
Yes, exactly. He sees poetry as a way of capturing the essence of human experience, those truths that traditional philosophy might miss. He believes that poetry can tap into a different kind of knowing, one that goes beyond logic and reason.
So it's not just about intellectual understanding, but also about emotional and intuitive understanding.
That's right. And he argues that poetry, with its use of imagery, metaphor, and rhythm, can express those complex, nuanced aspects of life that often defy explanation through logic alone.
That's really interesting. It's like he's saying poetry can illuminate truths that we might not even be able to articulate with words.
Precisely. And this is where we start to see the influence of some of the major thinkers of his time.
Like who?
Well, think of someone like Miguel de Unamuno. He was a Spanish philosopher and writer who also explored the limits of reason and logic, emphasizing the importance of intuition and faith.
So de Mairena wasn't alone in these ideas. It was part of a larger intellectual conversation happening in Spain at the time.
Exactly. And it's important to remember the historical context here. Spain in the 1930s was a place of intense intellectual and political ferment.
Right, because this book was published just before the Spanish Civil War broke out. It's hard to imagine the atmosphere must have been incredibly charged.
It was. And de Mairena's reflections on politics and ethics are deeply informed by that context. He was grappling with urgent questions about democracy, individual freedom, and social responsibility
Yeah.
in a society on the brink of collapse.
So while he's talking about these philosophical ideas, he's also very much engaged with the real-world turmoil happening around him.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that makes Juan de Mairena so compelling. It's not just abstract philosophy. It's a reflection on how to live meaningfully and ethically in a world that's often chaotic and unjust.
It's philosophy with real-world stakes.
Exactly. And those stakes become even more apparent when we look at de Mairena's exploration of existentialism.
Oh, so he's venturing into those big existential questions about the meaning of life.
He is. He's wrestling with the search for meaning in a world that often feels absurd and unpredictable. And this is where we see echoes of other influential thinkers like José Ortega y Gasset, another Spanish philosopher who's grappling with similar questions about individual purpose and the human condition.
So De Mairena is part of this larger philosophical movement that's trying to make sense of what it means to be human in a world that often feels meaningless.
That's a great way to put it.
Hmm.
And what's fascinating is how De Mairena approaches these weighty topics. Well, he doesn't always do it through long, drawn-out philosophical treatises. He often expresses his ideas through these short, impactful statements. Those aphorisms we talked about earlier.
Oh, right. Like those little nuggets of wisdom that pack a punch.
Exactly. And those aphorisms really reflect his and Machado's belief in the complexity of truth and the importance of multiple perspectives. It's like they're saying, hey, here's a thought to chew on. Don't just accept it, but turn it over in your mind. See how it resonates with you.
It's like he's inviting us to participate in the thinking process, not just passively absorb his ideas.
That's right. And that's one of the things that makes Juan de Mairena so engaging. It's not a lecture, it's a conversation.
And a conversation that feels surprisingly relevant even today, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. The challenges de Mairena was wrestling with, the role of education, the fragility of democracy, the search for meaning in a chaotic world, those are challenges we're still facing in many ways.
It's like Machado through De Mairena is offering us a set of tools to navigate the complexities of our own time.
Exactly. And those tools include skepticism,
Yeah.
critical thinking, and a deep appreciation for art and its power to reveal truth. These are tools that can help us make sense of our own experiences and find our own path forward.
It's amazing how, even though this book was written nearly a century ago, these ideas about skepticism, education, and art still feel so relevant today.
They do, don't they? And one of the things that makes Juan de Mairena so powerful is that it doesn't just present these ideas in a vacuum. Machado grounds them in real-world experiences and relatable scenarios.
You really get a sense of De Mairena as a character, not just a mouthpiece for philosophical ideas. It's easy to imagine him holding court in a cafe, debating these issues with his students.
That's a great point. Machado doesn't just lecture us from on high. He invites us into this world, into these conversations. He wants us to wrestle with these questions alongside de Mairena.
It's like he's saying, hey, let's explore these ideas together and see where they lead us.
Precisely. And that spirit of open inquiry is what makes Juan de Mairena feel so timeless. The questions he raises about the purpose of education, the fragility of democracy, the search for meaning in a world that can often feel absurd, these are questions that continue to resonate with us today.
Especially that idea of democracy being fragile. We tend to think of it as this solid, unbreakable thing. But history shows us that it's not.
You're absolutely right. And de Mairena, writing in the shadow of rising fascism in Europe, was keenly aware of that fragility. He understood that democracy requires constant vigilance, participation, and a willingness to defend its principles.
He doesn't offer any easy answers, does he? He's not saying, here's the solution to all our problems.
No, he doesn't. Instead, he challenges us to think critically, to engage with these complex issues, and to take responsibility for our own choices and actions. He's emphasizing individual responsibility within a larger social and political context.
That emphasis on personal responsibility really stands out. It's like he's saying, look, the world is messy and complicated, but we each have a role to play in shaping it.
And that's a message that feels especially relevant in today's world, where it's easy to feel overwhelmed by information overload and political polarization. De Mairena reminds us that ultimately we have to make choices based on our own values and principles.
It's about finding that balance between acknowledging the complexity of the world and recognizing our own agency within it.
Exactly. And de Mairena doesn't let us forget the power of art to inspire and guide us through those complexities. He keeps coming back to poetry as this unique form of knowledge, a way of accessing truths that might elude us through logic or reason alone.
It's like he's saying that in a world that's increasingly dominated by technology and data, we need to cultivate those other ways of knowing. Intuition, empathy, the ability to connect with beauty and meaning on a deeper level.
I think that's a really insightful way to put it. De Mairena is reminding us that there are multiple paths to understanding, and that sometimes the most profound truths are revealed through art, through feeling and intuition, rather than through pure intellect.
So what does all this mean for us? Why should we care about the musings of this fictional philosopher from almost a century ago?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yes.
And I think the answer lies in the enduring relevance of the themes Machado explores in Juan de Mairena. These are themes that continue to resonate with us today because they grapple with fundamental questions about the human experience.
Like how to find meaning in a world that often feels meaningless. How to live ethically in a world that often feels unjust.
Exactly. Think about the political and social divisions we're seeing all around us. De Mairena's emphasis on dialogue, empathy, and the search for common ground feels more urgent now than ever.
And his critique of rigid education systems,
Yeah.
his call for fostering critical thinking and creativity, those are conversations we desperately need to be having today.
Absolutely. And then there's that existential question, the search for meaning in a world that can feel chaotic and overwhelming. De Mairena reminds us that we all have the capacity to create meaning, to live authentically, and to find moments of beauty and connection even amidst the turmoil.
It's like Machado through De Mairena is giving us permission to embrace the complexity and uncertainty of life, to question everything, and to find our own path forward.
And to do so with a sense of humor
Yeah.
and a healthy dose of skepticism. He doesn't want us to take ourselves too seriously, but he also challenges us to take our responsibility to ourselves and to the world seriously.
That's such a crucial balance. It's like he's saying, yes, life is absurd, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't strive to live it meaningfully.
Exactly. And that meaning can come from engaging with art, from connecting with others, from simply being present in the world and appreciating its beauty and complexity.
And from never stopping questioning, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
From always being curious, always seeking new perspectives, always pushing ourselves to think more deeply about the world around us.
De Mairena is like this model for lifelong learning, isn't he?
He is.
Yeah.
And that's one of the most valuable things we can take away from Juan de Mairena. It's not about finding all the answers. It's about embracing the questions, the doubts, the uncertainties, and using them as fuel for growth and discovery.
It feels like Juan de Mairena is this invitation to embrace that ongoing journey of learning and questioning.
It is. And what's so refreshing about de Mairena's approach is that he doesn't present himself as some all-knowing authority figure. He's more like a guide, someone who's grappling with these big questions right alongside us.
And he's doing it with a sense of humor and humility, which makes him all the more relatable. It's not like he's preaching from a soapbox.
Exactly. He's inviting us into this intellectual playground, encouraging us to play with ideas, to experiment, to see what resonates with us.
That playful approach makes philosophy feel a lot less intimidating, doesn't it? It's like he's saying, don't be afraid to get your hands dirty, dive in and explore.
I think that's one of the most valuable takeaways from Juan de Mairena. It's not about finding all the answers or adhering to a rigid set of beliefs. It's about cultivating a mindset of curiosity, skepticism, and a willingness to challenge our own assumptions.
It's about embracing that uncomfortable space where we don't have all the answers.
That's where the real learning happens, isn't it? When we're willing to sit with uncertainty, to question what we think we know, to be open to new perspectives.
And I love how De Mairena reminds us that wisdom can come from unexpected places, like those aphorisms, those little sparks of insight that can suddenly illuminate a whole new way of seeing things.
Those aphorisms are like little gifts scattered throughout the book. Each one is a distillation of thought, a provocation to think differently, to consider a new angle.
They're like puzzle pieces that we can fit together to create our own understanding of the world.
That's a great analogy, because ultimately that's what Juan de Mairena is all about. It's about empowering us to become active participants in the construction of our own meaning and understanding.
It's not a passive experience. It's an invitation to engage, to question, to create.
Exactly. And that's what makes this book so enduringly relevant. The specific historical context might have changed, but the fundamental questions Machado explores, the purpose of education, the role of art, the search for meaning in a complex world, those are questions that will always be relevant to the human experience.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Juan de Mairena, what would you say is the most important message Machado is trying to convey?
I think it's the importance of cultivating a critical and engaged mind. Machado through de Mairena is urging us to be active thinkers, to question everything, to embrace the power of art and imagination, and to never stop searching for meaning and beauty in the world.
And to remember that it's okay not to have all the answers. In fact, that's where the real adventure begins.
Absolutely. It's in that space of uncertainty, of questioning,
Yeah.
of open-minded exploration that we truly grow and evolve.
So if you're ready to embark on that journey of intellectual exploration, I highly encourage you to check out Juan de Mairena for yourself. You might just find yourself surprised by how much this book, written nearly a century ago, speaks to the complexities and challenges of our own time.
And as you delve into Machado's world, I'll leave you with this final thought. Think about how you can apply de Mairena's principles of skepticism and critical thinking to your own life. How can you foster a more inquisitive spirit, a deeper appreciation for art, and a more engaged approach to the world around you?
It's a question worth pondering. And with that, we'll wrap up our deep dive into Juan de Mairena. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those minds engaged.